I call to order the Monday, July 2nd, 2008 Verona Plan Commission at 6:30. We'll begin with the roll.
Commissioner Tucker Long,
Here.
Commissioner Manley,
Here.
Mayor Diaz,
Here.
Alder Gaskell,
Here.
and Commissioner Bear and Lytle are absent excused.
Thank you. Next up, we will have item 3, approval of the minutes from the June 4th, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Questions, comments, corrections, or motions?
I'll move approval.
Motion by Commissioner Manley. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Gaskell. Last chance for corrections. All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. And that motion passes. Next up, we will have discussion and possible action regarding the planned unit development concept plan review for a proposed 28,849 square foot commercial development to be located in the west end south of West Verona Avenue, west of West End Circle, and east of Wall Street.
Thank you. Andy, if you could put the laptop up on the screen, I'd appreciate that. So the request tonight is for a plan development concept plan review. This is step 2 of 4 of the plan development process. Step 2 is a concept review before the Plan Commission. It gives the Plan Commission an opportunity to provide feedback to the applicant. This will also go to the Common Council meeting next Monday as well for the same process as well, for the opportunity for the Common Council to provide feedback to the applicant. The property in question is the yellow dot that's on the screen before you. This is the retail area for Steve Brown Apartments. Steve Brown Apartments also owns the 3 apartment buildings along West End Circle, and just south of this site is the new high school that is currently being constructed by the school district. This property has a long history, which I won't get into, but there was a project proposed for these lots, actually back in 2016 by Steve Brown Apartments. At that time, Steve Brown Apartments was looking at a 29-unit apartment building, 8 townhouses, and then also 15,200 square feet of commercial space. The applicant obviously did not go forward with those plans and has made revisions to the plans. The plans now are for a strictly straight retail development. There would be 3 buildings that would front along West Verona Avenue here, and there'd be a secondary building just south of those as well. For reference purposes, the 3 apartment buildings are just off the screen to the south of Stephen Way. The buildings itself would require setback exemptions as part of the plan development process. They're looking at buildings that have approximately a 0 setback along West Verona Avenue. Staff has no concerns with those. Those are setback exemptions that we've talked about before in previous plan development projects. So it's consistent with past conversations with the applicant and past projects that we've looked at along in this area. One thing I'll point out for an exemption that they'll need is for the drive-through. There is a drive-through plan for this building C4. The drive-through will be located between the road of West End Circle and the building itself. This property is located within the downtown overlay district. The requirement of that district says that no drive-through shall be located between the building and the street itself. Staff is actually comfortable with this drive-through location. We feel that requirement for the downtown overlay is more applicable to West Verona Avenue. This one would be between the building and West End Circle. So in this situation, we would be comfortable in looking at an exemption in this location. From a parking standpoint, the applicant is proposing 142 parking stalls. That comes out to be approximately 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. Staff has no concerns with that parking ratio. It is actually less than what you typically find on East Verona Avenue, but from a planning and development standpoint, it's within that acceptable range. Regards to parking as well, as specific uses come forward, such as restaurant-type uses, those will be reviewed as a conditional use, and we'll once again have the ability to examine the parking in the area. The applicant is proposing 4 access points to the site. The easternmost access point would be a right-in only. There would be full access to Stephen Way on the south in 2 different spots. Stephen Way would also have full access to Wall Street and also full access to West End Circle. And then we'd also have a right-in, right-out configuration from the development onto Wall Street. All these access points are consistent with the Verona Area School District traffic impact analysis that was completed last year. This development was actually included in that TIA, so staff has no concerns with the access points for the development itself. Stormwater management, there was a stormwater management pond that was developed when these lots were sold, I think 2 or 3 years ago, just southwest of the site. So the stormwater for the project will obviously go to the southwest. From a design standpoint, the applicant is proposing to use a high quality materials. It's a very nice looking development that will complement the apartment buildings in that area, but also provide a strong retail presence along West Verona Avenue. Staff has no concerns with the look or design of the project itself. One thing I'll just mention is that with conversations with the applicant, they may be looking at some signage exemptions for the project that would come forward as part of the general development plan. One of the exemptions may be for the wall sign along here. It's more of a decorative type looking wall sign, but it is larger than what the code allows. So that'll be a future conversations for the Plan Commission. Also in your packet, there was a monument sign at the actually the corner of, I believe, West End Circle and West Verona Avenue with some channel letters that said Market 5. Most likely that will require exemption due to the size of it. That's similar to what Hilldale has as kind of an entryway type signage. And the applicant's also looking at what potential ground signs are needed for this property as well. There may be a necessary exemption for that as well too. But those details will be reviewed as part of the general development plan. In general, staff is supportive of changing what was initially approved here with the residential component to a project that has all retail. We think it's a good use of the property. It fits with the new high school in the area, and it's also initially here looking like a great looking project. So that staff would be happy to answer any questions that you have. The applicant is here tonight, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions you have as well.
Questions, comments? Alder Gaskell.
So are we reconfiguring West End Circle? Right now, the boulevard, I think, takes you all the way to the apartment buildings. Right, there's no cut through there right now, is there?
Correct. So as part of those improvements that the school district's making as part of the high school, it would be opened at that time. So the school district is making significant improvements, and one of those cuts will be when they reconstruct the road will be a cut in that location.
So timing-wise, what comes first, do you think?
Well, I know the applicant's looking for entitlements this year, potentially starting construction in 19.
That's there right now.
Can you?
And if you
For an invitation, just wander up, I guess. Good evening, everybody. My name's Dan Seeley with Steve Brown Apartments. Regarding that curb cut, Alder Gaskell, Findorf already put that in to help with traffic leaving the apartment complex to basically stay away from the construction site. Otherwise, they did have to wrap all the way around and oftentimes come into conflict with construction activity. So that cut does exist right now. It's sort of a temporary. They put a curb in, but it'll need to be widened and sort of fully improved at the time the school project is done. In terms of timing, we really are sort of looking at bringing things online along with the completion of the school project, at least in the same, vicinity, whether or not it's the same 60 days or 30 days or whatever. It's sort of, we're targeting the same delivery date in general.
further questions?
Do you have any idea what the drive-through business is going to be?
We're hoping for some sort of a coffee shop.
Okay.
We've been in conversations with a couple of regionals, a couple of locals as well. That's sort of what we have pegged for that spot. We're certainly not thinking fast food, but we are thinking some sort of coffee usage in that location. That's the users that we're targeting.
And then Adam, what is the parking minimum for this right now?
It's a planned development, so it depends on the uses. So when it's a multi-tenant building, we don't calculate the parking just because we don't know who the uses are. So typically, if it's a straight retail, office, professional use, it's 1 space per 300 square feet. Once you get into the restaurant type uses, it comes down to the number of seats that a restaurant or a coffee shop would have. So in short, we haven't calculated that until we know who the users are. So it's actually not possible to do at this time.
Okay. It just looks like a lot of parking again, which I understand depends on your use. And I'm wondering if we can start to incorporate some innovative stormwater treatments instead of always just doing what we've been doing, because we're increasing dramatically the amount of pavement we're putting in Verona in all of our new developments. And can we do something different with the stormwater? And it's on my mind because I'm getting lots of calls and emails from people who are freaking about water, you know, in their yards. And I think it's time that, I mean, maybe this is more of a global thing, but we need to start thinking about treating it differently than we have been. Instead of large ponds, what can we do on site? So just an idea for you guys to maybe think about something.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing with the stormwater on this one's going to be set already because that pond was built a couple of years ago for this development and also for the property west of here that the UW Clinic owns. So probably from a stormwater standpoint, it's probably going to be set for these types of developments, but definitely with the Urbach property to the east, you know, other ones that haven't master planned their stormwater, those are ones we could take a look at.
Anything further? Commissioner Tucker Long.
This is a question for you. I apologize, I forgot your name.
Dan.
Dan, thank you. Have you thought at all about doing any sort of underground parking with these businesses?
We have not. We haven't explored the costs of the structured parking, but when we had originally thought about doing some apartment buildings there, we had underground parking for the larger of the buildings. And at that time, we were running into some bedrock issues. There's actually not a lot of dirt out there. It's a lot of rock. And so some of the costs of excavating for that particular structure were a little surprising and unwieldy. So no, not for the retail. We haven't thought about underground parking. We're not really leaning that direction.
Anything further? Other questions, comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to commend you on the design. When I saw this and I saw the renderings, first of all, the quality of the information that you gave us is tremendous. You know, a lot of times what we have to look at are one-dimensional elevations, and you know, to see something three-dimensional like this, you know, really helps you kind of conceptualize what you're trying to do. So that's very much appreciated. But just the varied architecture and the varied materials and you know, trying to make it look like an interesting place to visit. And I think you're going for a destination here. I mean, obviously, you've got a lot of people living in the area, both north and south, and then you're going to have high school people coming to the high school. But I think not just students, but all of the athletic fields for all of the sports, of which in Verona there are many. So I really do think you have a great opportunity to actually attract people to our community to spend their money in. And so I just wanted to commend you on that. I think it looks great. I had the privilege to be on the Plan Commission when we adopted the Verona Avenue design overlay, and I think at least from my perspective, this is exactly the type of architecture and you know, interesting buildings that we were really kind of hoping we'd get when we recommended that ordinance be adopted. So good job.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Further questions, Alder Gaskell?
To that end, I really appreciate the attention you paid to pedestrian circulation. You know, the crosswalks and the renderings are all striped. There's sidewalks everywhere. You're thinking about how people, high schoolers, are going to cut through, you know, the shortest path basically to get where they're going. I'm wondering if you do end up with a number of restaurants as tenants, will there be a change in design in terms of trying to accommodate them with some more outdoor space?
Yeah, right now we've sort of got outdoor space pegged next to the C1 building, which is the farthest west. There's a patio there, and we're planning on some sort of a covering, whether it's a pergola or an awning or a canopy or whatever it might be. There's also an outdoor space attached to the north end of C4. You can sort of see a canopy in that location as well. Other than that, the site is a little bit tight. We do plan on incorporating some landscaping elements, just simple things like benches and spaces that will be inviting to spend a little bit of time on. But in terms of bulk or large-scale outdoor seating, we're going to run into a little bit of constraint, other than the two that we have planned on C1 and C4.
Further comments, Commissioner Heinzen?
Sure, thank you. I agree with the others who have commented. This looks really, really very nice, and it's nice to see some commercial coming back to this spot after it was commercial and then residential and now back to commercial. Part of it at least. So that's fantastic. Curious with respect to the setbacks on West Verona Avenue. I guess there currently is a sidewalk there,
There is.
and does how does the setback or the reducing the size of the setback affect the passageway of the sidewalk at all, or does it just come up to the sidewalk, or not really all that close after all?
So on the screen before you, I think it's a 10-foot wide. I think it's a 10-foot wide bike and ped path that's out there, but you can kind of see the line right there. That's the bike and ped path right there.
The one that
Yeah,
you're on top of right now.
correct.
Okay.
That's, yeah. So I mean, from a strictly setback from the path, you're probably looking at just eyeballing here 10 feet.
Yeah.
So I mean, you'll be close, but you won't be on top of it.
Great. All right, thank you.
I'm going to make a few comments myself. Like, as Alder Gaskell noted, I think the circulation for people walking is really good. As someone who's walked along a ton of strip mall parking lots, it would be nice if more parking lots were designed that way. I like the way the trees look on the drawing, and I hope that's an accurate reflection of the landscaping and not just something that looks nice. Part of my cynicism, but you know how some of these
Understood.
concept designs.
Understood.
They're not going to be that big, Luke.
Not right
To
away.
begin
Not
with.
right away,
To
right,
begin with.
but there's like a lot of good spacing, and trees can help in a small way with stormwater stuff as well. I think also to reflect Alder Gaskell's comments, I also get a lot of complaints and concerns about stormwater and runoff in people's yards flooding, which isn't necessarily unique to this project, but I think it's something we want to keep in mind. As far as the shared parking, I think that's great, and it seems like it's more than adequate amount of parking there. And then I guess as far as the sign exemptions go, to me, like, I would be fine with them personally. I think we want this to be a destination, and I think you need a little bit better signs if it's going to be a destination location. So I'd be more than fine with that. Any other questions, comments from the commission? Commissioner Tucker Long.
One other thought with the trees. I also like the placement of the trees. I like that there's a lot of trees here. One thing you might consider is having some more evergreen trees to keep the greenness throughout the whole year and not just summer.
Mm-hmm. We'll be including a landscaping plan with the GDP submittal. I haven't seen it yet. I was on vacation, but we will be including one.
Anything further from the commission?
One last question. Are you phasing this at all, or are you?
No, we would anticipate this to be a single delivery.
That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. Do you feel like you have everything you need?
I think I'm good.
All right.
Appreciate the feedback.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Council.
everybody.
Thanks.
Council will be discussing this at our next meeting. Next up, we have item 5, which is a discussion and possible action, initial site plan review for proposed 5,112 square foot UW Credit Union to be located at 651 Hometown Circle.
Thank you. Andy, if you could put the PowerPoint back up. This is the initial review for the UW Credit Union's proposed building at 651 Hometown Circle. This is the former location of Dairy Queen on East Rowan Avenue. This project does require site plan approval from the Planning Commission and also requires a conditional use permit from the city for the drive-through use. The building itself would front along East Verona Avenue. The proposed building would be set back 15 feet from East Verona Avenue. This is within the downtown overlay design district, which requires a minimum setback of 15 feet from East Verona Avenue and a maximum setback of 25 feet. So the 15 feet conforms to the requirements. It also requires a minimum building height of 20 feet, and the proposed building will be 20 feet to meet that requirement. They'll have 3 drive-through lanes, as shown on the site plan. They're having 29 parking spaces. The 35 is mislabeled on there. And as part of this, they would also close the access point, the shared access point with Taco Bell. The reason for closing that is just because of the drive-through configuration. It just wouldn't create a safe situation in this location. The applicant would have 2 access points onto Hometown Circle, an access point on the east and access on the west as well. Both of those would provide full access to the site. Initially, staff has no concerns with the access. It appears to be sufficient for the use. Stormwater management plan will be reviewed as the project moves forward. Initially, the applicant is looking to utilize underground stormwater management and storage for this project, but those details will be reviewed as the project moves ahead. The building itself, the applicant is proposing to use high-quality materials for the project. It would be a mixture of stone, brick, and metal. There's a couple elevations in your packet, one of which is on the screen before you. It would include a significant amount of glass along East Verona Avenue and provide a kind of a unique looking building that will I think complement other buildings in the city. One thing to point out as part of this is the applicant is intending to use the existing monument sign that was allowed for Dairy Queen. And as part of the final approvals, the applicant will come in with some general renderings of what that will look like. So with that, staff recommends the Plan Commission review the submitted materials, provide feedback to the applicant. The applicant's here tonight, and they'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for the explanation. Questions, comments from the commission? Oh, Commissioner Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Adam, the orientation of the building looks like it is being shifted from sort of what is in existence now, kind of a more true north-south to a orientation that's parallel to East Verona Avenue, as the other properties are in Hometown Circle. Am I seeing these plans accurate?
Correct. So the orientation on the screen before you, the other three properties in there have that orientation towards East Verona Avenue. The former Dairy Queen was along that true east-west orientation, and this new building would match the other three properties in this area.
Okay, good. I'm actually in favor of doing that. I think it looks better from my perspective, and I think the building looks very nice. That's it.
Thank you. Other questions, comments from the commission? Everyone pretty happy with it, or?
And
Commissioner Heinzen?
Sure. No, I have no comments other than to say that the building looks very nice. It'll look very nice in the space that it's going into, and I don't have any specific comments beyond that. Love the glass.
I guess I'll comment on myself. I like the way the building looks. It looks good. I'd like to see some potential evergreen screening around the back, maybe a little bit towards the parking lot, but that's basically it. Alder Gaskell?
Adam, it says in the packet that staff has concerned with that sort of landscape bulb out that's sort of plunked down there in the middle of the pavement. Is that accurate?
I don't know if it's really a concern. It's just, we never know what to do with these situations, and we hate to say turn it just into asphalt. It's just one of those interesting kind of features you get in parking lots, and we have them elsewhere in the city. I mean, I think we're fine with it. It's just we don't know if there's a better configuration, and we would hate to lose the landscaping there. So I think we're fine with it for that reason. But it is an interesting configuration when you have that kind of, it's the bulb right there. It just is kind of an interesting configuration. But we have these in the city elsewhere, and it's not crazy about it, but it's one of those, if we take it out, then it's all just parking, or it's all just asphalt. So I'd rather have it landscaped and have it decorative and kind of break up that. But I don't know, it's,
Would
yeah.
that be one of the underground storage access points or not?
I don't think so, no. I
Right.
don't believe that's the case, no. Just when parking lots sometimes lay out like this, you just kind of get some leftover space that you wish was a little bit bigger and a different configuration, and this is one of those situations. Not a big deal. It's just if anyone has any ideas how to make changes to that, we'd be open to it. But we're not exactly sure how you fix that without taking it out altogether, which I don't think is a good idea. We're fine with it, but we're open to ideas if there was something better out there.
Cool. Any other comments?
I'm just wondering about the bike parking. Right now, I guess we'd expect people to come off the path and walk up the 5-foot sidewalk and walk in front of the entire building and then park in that corner versus coming off of the street. Is that the idea?
Correct. So Andy, if you could put the image back up on the screen. So, correct. If you're coming off the sidewalk or off the street, you would then come up the path here and then park the bike in that location. If you came in from hometown, Circle, you'd probably come in the drive and then park that way.
If it's possible to move it closer to East Verona, that's what I do. I don't think people are going to bike on Hometown Circle. I think that's probably a little bit dicier than coming either on the bike lane or the bike path. And I don't know if that's possible, just a switch of the parking or not.
Sure. The applicant's nodding his head, probably is something they can look at and might be possible.
Okay.
Great. Any other comments? All right. With that, it will be on the next council agenda. Oh, it will not. Okay, my apologies. It will not. Getting ahead of myself. All right, with that, we'll move on to the next item. Item 6, discussion and possible action regarding an initial review for a proposed subdivision to create 21 single-family lots and a parcel for the future Public Works facility to be located west of Range Trail and north of East Chapel Royal Drive.
Thank you. Andy, if you could turn the screen on for me, that'd be great. So this is the initial review for the Purple Cow property. The Purple Cow property is located along Range Trail. It's highlighted in yellow on the screen before you. Actually, it's this property in red here, this site here. And the rest of the yellow property is actually land that is currently owned by Viridian Homes. The applicant is requesting an initial review of the project to get feedback on the proposed concept for the single-family portion of the site, and also feedback on the potential or future public works facility to be located on the property. The development does require many approvals, which includes annexation, rezoning, a road vacation, site plan approval, preliminary plat, final plat, CSM. So it takes the full gamut of city approvals. But we want to take this forward just for the initial kind of concept prior to kind of getting into the details of this. So the plan submitted in the packet is for the 21 single-family homes and also the future public works facility. The single-family homes would be are in the orange color on the screen before you. It would be a mix of neighborhood residential lots and community residential lots. Those final configurations will be, resolved as the project moves forward. The site is currently the portion of it is located in the town. The portions that are located within the Cathedral Point subdivision are zoned neighborhood residential in this location here, and then this site over here is actually zoned urban residential, which is our multifamily zoning district. So as part of this, they'd be zoning the properties when they're brought into the city, and then the multifamily designation be rezoned to a single-family designation. As part of this, the applicant would be constructing a cul-de-sac from Steeple Point, which would become a cul-de-sac here. It currently stops at the Purple Cow property. It would then be cul-de-saced, and there would be a new road constructed off of East Chapel Royal Drive to serve the single-family lots in that area. As part of this as well, the blue property would be owned by the city with the intention for that future public works facility. So there's two pieces to this. You have the Viridian piece, which is the single-family piece, which is the orange once again, and the blue would be the kind of the city portion as well. It's a joint kind of shared project between the developer and the city. The public works facility, this is actually a concept plan or a rendering from a space needs study that was completed by the Public Works Department and presented to the council in June of 2017. This is a very rough drawing, I'll say. It's kind of a sketch to ensure that a building could be placed in this property. I think there's definitely some refinements that will occur to this based upon as the project moves forward in the future. But this is the general layout of kind of how a facility could be placed on the property. It would potentially have 2 access points to Range Trail. These will be finalized in the future, but there would be access to Range Trail, not through the subdivision. There would also be actually significant berming and landscaping along the back sides of these lots as well, to screen those lots from the future Public Works facility. From a site design and a building design standpoint, those are details that will be worked out as the Public Works facility becomes designed and fully engineered. I think a couple comments from staff on that is it's going to need to be a high quality project due to the fact that it's adjacent to a single family area, and also that it has a significant amount of exposure on 151. So we'll need to ensure that it's a good looking building that that since it's going to be very visible from the roadway, especially the highway, and then also from Range Trail as well too. Tentatively, the city is targeting with the developer to purchase the lands at the end of 2018. I know the applicant for the single-family home portion is hoping to potentially start construction for those lots, or at least the grading for some of the utilities of those lots in the end of 2018. And then the timing of the Public Works facility will obviously be dependent upon council authorization and budgeting cycle and whatnot. But I believe the target for that could be, I think, 2021, 2022, 2023, someplace in there is what the initial kind of timeline is for that project. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. This is just the initial review. Most likely when this comes back, you'll have a CSM before you. The CSM, it needs to be created to kind of separate the city's lot in this location here, and then the lots from the Purple Cow that the developer is acquiring. And then immediately after that, on the same agenda, we'll probably have a preliminary plat and also a final plat that would actually create the single family lots. And then we'll also have potentially a rezoning as well too. And then as part of that as well, the council will be looking at annexation and then also developers agreements as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have Theron Jacobson, our Director of Public Works, is here. He'd be happy to answer any questions. And then we also have representatives from Veridian here as well too, who'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for that explanation. Questions, comments from the commission? Commissioner Tucker Long and then Commissioner Heinzen.
For the single family home lots, how big are these lots?
Good evening. Brian Munson with Vanderwall & Associates here on behalf of Veridian Homes. Effectively, we see these lots as being comparable to what you find in Cathedral Point right now. So we'd be using, as Adam mentioned, a mixture of NR and CR zoning, and that would conform to the standards within those districts. We haven't gotten down to the final configurations. We're just working at this stage to try to get through to the first steps of, as Adam mentioned, quite a few. So we'll have a lot more detail about which lots specifically are in each district, but just in general character, we see these as extensions of the neighborhood.
So are we looking at like quarter acre lots or?
So some of these I believe would range, they probably wouldn't, trying to remember where, 8 to 12,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's about a quarter. Okay. Anything further? Commissioner Heinzen and then Commissioner Manley.
I was just actually going to ask the same question that you did about the size of the lots, but and obviously you know the business much better than I do as far as whether or not someone's going to buy a house right next to a new public's work department. But if I mean I would say this is that I have no concerns with what is being proposed here. I do question, sort of curious about the odd sort of cul-de-sac with the piece of, I guess, park area in the middle of that cul-de-sac, if that's pretty common or not. Who would maintain that? Is that something that the city would have to maintain, that little, thumbprint?
Well, I can answer a couple of those.
Okay.
As far as one of the benefits of work in partnership with the city and knowing that this is being evaluated for public works facility is disclosure is everything. So in terms of the potential future buyers of those lots, we'll make sure those are in their CCRs, the deeds, restrictions on the properties, disclosures throughout, so that everybody who buys knows what's coming. So there's a very good thing about knowing that. We think actually that we don't see that as negative necessarily. Their streets might get plowed faster than everybody else, so there's some upsides. But certainly making sure everybody's aware of what's going to happen is going to be critical for that. In terms of the cul-de-sac on the southeast corner, that's fairly similar as Winchester Court in the southwest side of Cathedral Point has a similar arrangement where you have a small amount of open space. And maintenance of that has ranged in different municipalities and different neighborhoods, from HOA responsibilities to homeowner responsibilities to municipalities. We haven't really gotten into the details at this stage. Yep.
Commissioner Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was excited to see the addition of some single-family lots. I just feel like we've got some in the works, but we don't have a ton of them quite online yet, and it's becoming a barrier to, having new people come to the city. I almost wish it was more. And I say that fully understanding, at least from what I've read in the newspaper, that the Public Works Department definitely is outgrowing its existing facility and needs to be somewhere else. But if I'm thinking about Cathedral Point and Scenic Ridge when they were sort of developed at approximately the same time, if this property was not in use by Purple Goose at that time, I don't think anybody would have ever said, when we design this neighborhood, let's put let's take 20 acres and turn them into public institutional and see if we can put a great big public works facility there. So I'm just struggling with whether or not public institutional is the best use of this parcel, if it would be better as either residential or commercial now that this property is going up for sale. So that's one, I guess, question in my own mind at this point. Two other questions I had were, and I understand the berm and the idea of trying to have a buffer between these 21 lots and the property, but when you have a yard waste drop off, when you get rain and heat in the summer, and I know from my own experience with the Bruce Street one that, if you go there to drop off clippings, sometimes it's really, it gets pretty gamey. And I'm just not sure if putting that next to or in a residential subdivision is a fantastic idea. And maybe there's a way to sort of mitigate that. But that was another thought that I had. And then the final, I guess, question that I had is, as we look at this picture, I'm just a little bit confused, and maybe you can help me understand what's going on here. As we look at this picture, there appears to be the creation of a pretty large stormwater basin just north of East Chapel Royal Drive that presumably would serve the city property, perhaps some of the residences as well. And just south of that, there's another stormwater property, or what appears to be on the map a stormwater basin. And then on the conceptual drawing that Adam had, there's another retention basin drawn. So I'm just, can we bring?
Going on.
Yeah, can we?
Sure. Well, I'll tackle the first couple, and I will defer to the engineers to talk about the stormwater. But yeah, when Viridian sales team found out that there's a potential for 21 more lots at Cathedral Point, they were very excited. So they are looking forward to bringing these online and for the sales within the neighborhood, both from demand and as Cathedral Point is beginning to fill up. and finish off the last phases. So they're excited about that. The other aspect about being a good neighbor with what's there today, again, Purple Cow has been doing composting on site, so it's not a departure from a yard waste standpoint to what the use is today. And so we feel that, to a large extent, a new public works facility might actually be a better neighbor sometimes down the line. And so, we don't see that as necessarily negative. Obviously, when this was planned way back in 2006, somewhere in that timeline when we laid out Cathedral Point, we extended streets up to the Purple Cow, assuming that something was going to happen over time. In this case, of course, the Public Works land needs really didn't necessitate any internal connections or needs for additional street connections within it. And that range trail would give them ample opportunity to access the facility. So those are what we've been removing as we've redesigned these lots along this area with the two cul-de-sacs. So Viridian's very comfortable with the configuration. We'll look forward to working with city staff on how to put the screening berm and landscaping in. Obviously, if you look at the site today, folks have bought right along 151, not just within Cathedral Point, but within, to the Scenic Ridge or to the east of Hawthorne Hills. So we see this as a good addition in completing out Cathedral Point. In terms of the stormwater, there's a lot on the map that is actually already there, and I will turn to Dan to kind of tackle those.
So the original stormwater management, good evening, my name's Dan Day from Denali.
Thank you, I was just about to ask you.
Sorry about that. The pond that you see there is actually in place today and is part of the Cathedral Point neighborhood stormwater management plan that was put in, that we had approved back in 2006. It's actually a combination with the pond south of East Chapel Royal and works together. So this pond will be doing the work of what it was meant to originally, and then also taking these new lot areas here also. It will definitely, it will not be servicing the city's grounds at all, because that's actually downstream from that pond, and is downhill from it. So the city will have to do their own stormwater management on their site, on your site, their site. I don't really want to say that. A little bit weird there. As far as going back to the use, whether residential or public institution, this has been a very delicate balance to get to this point today where we're at. I think, obviously Theron can much better describe the city's needs for the public works facility and why this location is very important to them. If this was all going to be single family, it never would have been purchased for single family because of the value of the land. The only way we were able to put this all together is a concert working with the city to be able to put this full deal together. So I think contemplating that is it would be better all single family. That's just not reality because that would have probably never happened just with the way the thing was all structured.
If I could just do a follow-up. So if the value of this property is so significant that you couldn't even make it financially feasible developing it as single-family homes, that, again, in my mind, begs the question of whether such a valuable property is the best location to put a city-owned facility and take it off the tax rolls.
I mean, I'll let obviously, go ahead, sorry.
Commissioner Manley, I think Theron can get it for you, but the city hired a person who literally his expertise is doing this because there's so many communities right now experiencing this pressure of that their public works facility is too small. In fact, McFarland's about to go through it, I think. And in that need study, I think there were 4 sites evaluated, and this was the only one that sort of hit all the criteria and also afforded the opportunity to a partnership that takes some of the cost away from us as a city. So, and I think the fact that it was, right now it's kind of a composting facility, maybe people don't see the value of that land, but I think due diligence has been done on part of the city figuring out where this could go, and this is literally the only site that came up with.
Mr. Jacobson, if you'd like to provide.
Thank you,
comments.
Mr. Mayor. Theron Jacobson, City of Verona, Director of Public Works. In January 2017, I engaged with Barrientos Design. They did the space needs analysis that Ms. Gaskell referenced. There were 3 sites evaluated within that space needs study. And there were certain criteria within the study, and I can send you, all members of the commission, that study. It looked at location, size, constructability, utilities, site access, meaning to transportation, and one of the other most important things is the proximity to the residents because of the destination point that we are. The 3 locations that were identified was the property at hand, the Purple Cow site, actually the property across the street to the east, and then the Matt's property on the north side of Bruce Street, east of the Badger Mill Creek. This property, the Purple Cow property, had every check mark green light. The other ones had constructability issues, access issues, and then just unwilling to ultimately sell, or environmental issues. As an internal staff, we looked at multiple other sites, either myself or talking with Mr. Sayer on other locations, whether it was out in the Liberty Business Park on the far east end or north of Wayland Road. One of the hindering components is the size that we need. It's very hard to find a lot that's 15 to 18 acres in size that is contiguous, relatively constant grade due to the size of the buildings and adjacent buildings that we have. It puts a hindering on where we can go. And then also the proximity of the other sites that we were looking at were a mile out of town, and that's not where we want to be because of the access issue. It changes our response times. We're not police, fire, EMS, but we do a lot of back and forth all day, every day, whether it's brush collection, snow plowing, street sweeping, going to our construction projects, meetings, etc. Everything full circled back to the study. As you can see, we're in the middle of 2018. We started this in early 17. We presented the space needs study in June of 17. I approached Veridian in early March, Dan? Yeah, about potential on this project. And actually at the beginning of that, I think there was 13 lots laid out, and they took the maps that we made up and fine-tuned them to get 7 more lots on them, 8 more lots on them, which was a benefit for everyone. Regarding the yard waste pickup, or excuse me, the composting site and yard waste, right now out in the East Pit along Northern Lights, I'm getting the laydown yard set for that right now. I'm hoping to have that operational within 2 years. So that means where our yard waste goes right now, which is on this site that we're talking about off of Range Trail, is going to be moved out to the East Pit on Range Trail. So basically the operations would be non-existent, and then once we acquire the property, their operations would cease on site also. So, and then any of the site configuration will be determined at a future date. One of the comments that we've gotten is, being able to have a 24/7 drop off for at least the yard waste instead of just the hours that we're open now, and then the late evenings Monday, and then the daytime hours on Saturday. We'd have everything facing north, so there's not a visual issue from the south. We're trying to work as a party here, and then working with city staff, me being one of them, of course, and the commission and the council. So we're trying to do everything that we see right here and benefiting everyone to make this a win-win-win. So I can answer any other questions.
Commissioner Heinzen?
Sure. Just curious, how big is the space that you have right now?
The
acreage-wise.
It's when you add the 1 acre that the VACT site is on, we have 7 acres, and it's not really contiguous. And what I mean by contiguous is a box, the rectangle shape that this is, because that's also one of the kind of the constraints that we have too. The VACT site helped. It alleviated some of that initial pressure that we have now, but we're still exploding at the seams.
Thanks.
Yep.
Further questions for Mr. Jacobson, or questions and comments in general?
The property lines, are they just conceptual on here? I'm just wondering about this. Are we going to true up this line? I don't know if that's done to make that sort of middle lot at the top of the cul-de-sac a little bit bigger.
Looking at that figure that's on the screen,
Well,
Those
there's
would
one
be
that
con-
runs behind the stormwater and then, you know, we does that little jog. I'm just wondering if that's conceptual or if that's really what the property lines are gonna look like.
Something that is most likely there is gonna be that bump out,
Okay.
call it there. Actually, we have a sanitary sewer that runs right through there. That's really unbuildable for structure
Okay.
area anyways. So that actually kind of works out that there's a benefit for Viridian and a benefit for us too right there. So there'd be, at the time of the acquisition, there'll ultimately be 3 lots. There will be lot 1, which will be the city's large lot, and then lot 2
Okay.
over by the cul-de-sac, and then lot 3, which is the area you're asking about right now, Ms. Gaskell.
Commissioner Tucker Long.
In the lot 3 area, I think you said, is the one in the bottom right corner, is that correct?
Southeast corner. Yep.
Okay. Did I hear that that was originally supposed to be multifamily?
Correct.
Okay. I guess, have we looked at all at doing multifamily there instead of single-family homes? I mean, if we're looking at being able to bring more people into Verona, I mean, we can bring in, 8 families there, but certainly a multifamily situation there would bring in quite a few more families.
Adam, if I could answer that one. That parcel's been on the market since we've started Cathedral Point, and with very little interest at all in multifamily. A combination of factors, just where it is in the overall marketplace, the density that would be allowed, and the number of units that could have been realized on that parcel. So when we looked at this, we're reevaluating switching that from multifamily to a single-family format for several years prior to this conversation, just because there hasn't been any market interest in it.
Commissioner Manley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I'm looking at the conceptual rendering of what the Public Works facility would look like, it looks like it, and I get it that it's conceptual, but it looks like about half of the site, roughly, would be utilized. Can you comment on the need for a property that's this big?
Mhm.
And then a follow-up question when you answer that. Are there any plans in terms of what happens with the existing site? Does that remain operational, or does that get consolidated into this property?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Manley, I'll answer your second question first, and then I'll answer the first question. The plans for the current facility, we would be a full vacation. So we would move from there to the new facility. Whether that gets redeveloped, sold, that's been a conversation at the council level too, where it's kind of an open question right now, what ultimately is gonna happen with it. I think we have an idea what the value of it is, but where we go with it in the future could also be a budgetary question too, and other interests. So I guess I'll kind of leave it at that. Regarding the space needs, the site does look like we're only utilizing half of it, but that's going to change with topography. Once we actually get a ground topo, that's going to expand, widen. We'll look at turning movements throughout the site. And one of the other components of the space needs study was expandability. And that's one of the key components of making sure we have a site that's large enough. That's where it gets into that 15 to 18 acres. To go where we're at now, to expand to get to the ideal need, we need 12 acres to expand in the future, whether that's in 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, as the city continues to grow. We want to set this site up so basically we can push out one end of the building. In this case, it'd be the west end of the building. So the idea thought in the space needs study was more of a tilt-up building, because you can take one end off, expand it, and then put that wall back up. Stormwater management's got to be sized too. That's going to be on the northwest. The areas, if you look at the map on here, the areas that Viridian will end up acquiring are some of the open space items too. The berms will take up some space on the south side and the west side. We need to make sure the utilities are properly separated from any buildings. So it'll get configured, the layout will get expanded, and we want to make sure there's proper site circulation for the drop-off site, whether it's the e-waste, the yard waste, and then our construction material storage, because that's one of the big problems we have out back, is that circulation. It becomes our own little traffic jam in the back of the parking lot there.
Any further questions?
Yeah, if I could just follow up, was there ever any consideration given to the land that the city owns that you had mentioned prior on the east side of Northern Lights that's currently being filled in?
We looked at that. For us to get that amount of fill in there, it would take decades, or it would cost significant amount of money. Not only that, if you look at proximity to the residents of the city, we're kind of on that way northwest end of the city. Granted, depending on which way it grows, that can obviously change. There's no utilities out there. That's one of the other bigger items. There's water, but sewer is non-existent.
So do you think we're probably decades away from having some kind of a recreational trail or park use or other things that have been talked about out there?
Trail-wise, I'd say we're paved trails. I'd say we're close, because we got a 10-foot bike path all the way up to Northern Lights and PD currently, and all the way up along PD to Woods Road. Once we get the expansion of County Trunk PD completed from Woods Road to County Highway M, that path will connect into the system that is being installed under the M project currently. So there will be a full loop, an off-road full loop and an on-road full loop there for walkers, bikers. An Ice Age Trail connection is that it wouldn't be able to answer.
Thank you.
So, yep.
Further questions, comments from the commission? I'm just going to say one thing myself. Yeah, I just want to emphasize regarding that people need to know the public works facility is going to be there, because sometimes when people are selling houses, they kind of give a rosy version of what the neighborhood might like, and it might not be accurate. So I want to emphasize to anyone that, like, yeah, people should know that if they get a house there, it's going to be next to the public works facility. And then the second thing is I like the number of lots. I think there's a need for single family homes. It would be great if you could squeeze in a few more lots. I imagine you've looked at it, but like 21 is pretty good, but like 25 could be better. But that was my only bit of feedback. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Regarding the number of lots too, the lands that are in orange on the first image on Figure 2 of the initial review plan that Adam prepared for you, that basically is kind of the high grounds of the site, kind of the unusable area that is, I don't want to say inaccessible to us, but it would be undesirable for us on the public works facility side. So obviously Veridian and D'Onofrio are going to do their homework on where the lots need to be, but that's kind of the northern and eastern edge of those is pretty much kind of set based on grade too.
Okay. Further questions, comments? Seeing none. All right. And with that, we will move on to item 7, a discussion regarding zoning ordinance amendments. Mr. Sayer.
Sure, there's 2 items on the agenda. First one's talking about setbacks. Next one's talking about timing of the comprehensive plan update and a zoning ordinance update. Andy, if you could turn the screen on for me. So this is intended tonight. We're gonna go through kind of initially just the conversation about setbacks. Want to just have an initial conversation here with the Plan Commission, get your feedback, get your thoughts on as we work on this. So I'm gonna kind of briefly go through a presentation here. If you have any questions, comments, just stop me on the slide that we're at. So it's intended to be more informal here. So I guess this is kind of what we have right now. If you ever wanted to look and see what our setbacks are in the city and what our requirements are. This is the matrix. This is the table that we use. In our current ordinance, we have this graph, and then we also have each district has a separate section breaking out the same exact information. That's one of the challenges with the ordinances. To be quite honest with you, the table and the wording in the code is actually sometimes not completely accurate. So it does need some updates for consistency and probably just having one area just referencing it. But generally, this is what we look at. This is what developers look at. No different than many other municipalities as well. You may see on here that we have two different categories in the NR, the MR, the UR. That's because it talks about residential standards and non-residential standards. That's quite honestly a challenge we have in the code. It's a little convoluted, especially when your residential district typically is just dealing with residential uses, but then it has a section dealing with non-residential uses. Typically our setbacks, though, just to kind of start the conversation, is 25 feet in the front, 25 feet in the rear. And then for the NR district, it's 10 feet on the sides. And then for the CR district, it's 6 feet for a single-story house and 8 feet for a two-story house. So those are our basic setbacks that we kind of want to talk about tonight. So as I said before, looking at removing some of the office and commercial from the residential setbacks. Once again, looking at, we need to clean up the section that talks about non-residential standards in residential districts. We need to be consistent because right now some of our standards aren't consistent throughout the code. And then we also need to take a look at, do we want diagrams and kind of pictures in the changes that will help kind of depict what we're talking about as well. And we have some examples of that too, but looking at kind of visually, do you want to visually show things versus more, by words and numbers? Do we try to visually show it as well too to kind of make it easier for people to read? So first of all, looking at pavement setbacks, typical residential district has a 3-foot pavement setback from the rear property line and also from the side property line. It also has a 10-foot setback from the front. I think staff generally we're kind of comfortable with these setbacks from a pavement standpoint. There are some inconsistencies within the ordinance that we do need to clean up. One inconsistency that we should consider is the code for non-residential standards has a 5-foot setback. We may want to have that conversation. The larger setback may be necessary, though, to get landscaping within that, between the pavement and the property line. But there are some slight inconsistencies that we need to clean up regardless. But for residential areas, there is a 3-foot side yard setback and rear yard setback and 10-foot front yard setback. I don't know if anybody has any comments or concerns about that. If not, I'll just kind of keep moving through these. So kind of getting into the actual structure itself. So once again, when you look at a property, you have the street in front of you. This is one of those diagrams we talked about. You have the terrace, the green area kind of between the sidewalk and street. We have the sidewalk, and then typically about a foot behind the sidewalk, that's where your property line actually starts, and that's where you start measuring from the setback. So the front setback, when we talk about that, is the front of the house, the front that faces the road, the sides of the sides that are on the side of the house, and then the rear is the opposite of the front. Typically, the rear yard setbacks, the rear yard setback requirement in the city is 25 feet. Within the city, generally we're finding setbacks in the rear from 25 to 40 feet, just on average generally. Other municipalities, as we did some research in the area, the setbacks range from 20 to 25 feet. I think if the Plan Commission desired to make any changes to this, you could potentially take the rear yard setback from 15 to 20 feet. Typically, the rear is what's more valuable to most people from a use standpoint. Typically, that's where you find your sheds or your play structures or places of activity. Typically, more than your front yard. But there could be the potential, if the Plan Commission directed staff, we could potentially make some changes to that to reduce that rear yard setback. I think from staff standpoint, we're indifferent. I think if you're going to probably leave a setback the same as it is now, it'd probably be the rear one, just because, like I said, that's where you get more of the play and activity. The one thing with the setbacks as well, it's as you look at that rear yard, typically they vary through yards. So you can look down the back of a house, the back of a property line, and it's going to vary depending on how far how deep each property is, and it may, between the two properties, you may have 50, 60, 70 feet between the two properties. So you you do potentially get those larger yards that people could potentially gather in and use, but sometimes you get just fences along the back lot lines as well too. So I guess for initially here, let's talk about the rear yard setbacks. Is there any feelings to modifying that from the existing 25-foot setback to looking at something that is smaller?
I just want to clarify one thing quick. We're talking about requirements. So like, if we specified, let's say, a 15-foot minimum requirement, that means if a developer wanted to, they could do 25, 30, depending on what they think the market wants.
Correct. So this is just the minimum setback that we require. That's a good question in the ordinance.
Commissioner Heinzen.
Sure, I guess I'll start with this, Adam. Has anyone, to your knowledge, been troubled by the setback being too great as it is right now? And that might be one of the reasons why we should look at this, is because, you know, people have come to the city and have been unhappy with 25 feet.
For the rear, no. I have not heard any issues with the rear yard setback, no.
Commissioner,
well,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I guess with respect to all the setbacks, and I'll start with the rear, I guess, is that my default would be to not change anything unless there is a very specific and good reason why we should. Because it could be one of a couple things. It could be because we know that people have come to the city, you know, the front or the side. I can imagine side setbacks are troublesome at times. Or if, you know, in the literature, in conversations with other communities, we know that has been a problem, or setbacks are too great in some of those other places. We want to sort of get ahead of the curve in what could otherwise be a problem. But I think just to change it for the changing's sake without having a good reason to do so, I, at least at the moment, would think that it's not necessary.
Commissioner Tucker-Long.
Going along with that, I was going to ask what the benefit is of decreasing it. Do we?
The rear yard setback?
Yeah.
You potentially get greater use of land. I mean, it could potentially, what this is going to lead into is that, you know, we wanted kind of your feedbacks on the setbacks, but as we look at minimum lot sizes as well, of looking at potentially making modifications to that, obviously if the setbacks are smaller, then potentially the minimum lot sizes could be decreased as well too. So, so if you had smaller setbacks, smaller kind of lot sizes, ultimately you potentially can have more lots.
I assume we're talking about our neighborhoods that are coming online. Do we gain an advantage by keeping the setback where it is in terms of water storage in the backyards?
I don't think from a water quality standpoint, no. I mean,
Not
typically
even
this.
quality. I'm just thinking about some of our existing neighborhoods. You know, right now, when we have these massive storms, the water is starting to really approach. On the smaller lots, getting pretty close to the house, and the backyard is underwater, but it's functioning that way. And I wonder if we start shortening up our setbacks, are we gonna have water issues again?
I don't think so. I think some of the water issues is some of the older neighborhoods, especially. That's where you see the problems where the stormwater wasn't built to today's standards because it was a different time.
True, but I think that I would say that our, 100-year storm calculations haven't been updated whatsoever for climate change. We're still using old numbers and old formulas, which we don't have a choice because there's not anything new, but we need to start thinking about that beyond just plugging in the numbers into the formulas, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, Theron, you've been dealing with this nonstop for this entire season, I think, right?
Correct. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, I'm an engineer by trade too, so stormwater is one of the expertise that I did deal with. They did update the storm rainfall depths and intensities. The intensities are how much rainfall falls over a duration of time. They did update those. It was 2 years ago, and we've modified those into our ordinance. That's just still your theoretical storm event. Every storm event is different, whether it's a rainfall or a snowfall event. The items that we're seeing regarding drainage issues through some of these neighborhoods is where the finished floor elevations are set on buildings, and then how narrow the side yard setbacks. Because if somebody's built that, I'm just throwing numbers here, elevation 100, and your neighbor builds at elevation 104, and your houses are 16, 20 feet apart. Guess what? You got 4 feet to try and develop a side yard swale, get your downspouts through. It's not going to happen. Somebody is going to be the receiving end of all that additional storm water, and it's typically your roof water, and we get neighbor complaints. This neighbor's putting water on my property, this neighbor's putting water on my property, so it becomes it's a challenge for us because we can't do anything about it.
So
Nor
that's
should
more
we.
of a side yard setback than a rear then?
Correct. I mean,
Okay.
rears you can have the same. Rears aren't as, it depends on the grade of the land. I mean, if it's out in Cathedral Point or Scenic Ridge where there's plenty of rolling terrain, no. But if you're up in the Basswood area, it's a problem. It's a challenge. And then if you got open space behind it with inadequate drainage, that becomes another issue too. So a lot of them are case by case, but you want to be cautious on how much flexibility you leave yourself and then property owners in the future to maintain their open space.
Commissioner Manley.
I think just one other thing that I would add to the discussion on side yards is that I think at some point we have to think about fire safety as being an issue. Our first house in Verona was in the Kettle Creek subdivision, and our backyard neighbor on Dunhill had his gas grill catch on fire, which caught his garage on fire, which melted, thankfully, with 10-foot and 10-foot side yard setbacks, which I think they didn't go all the way up to the 10 feet, so it's actually more than 20 feet, but it melted all of the siding off of the next door neighbor's house and started singeing the sheathing underneath the siding, and I worry that if we allow houses to be built closer together, that we run the risk of making a structure fire, potentially leap from one structure to another and have a greater impact. Just something to think about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Any other questions for me?
Get on.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
I guess we can let Theron go home. I'll just make
Run.
Yeah, before someone thinks it's something else. I'll just make a general comment. I think that we get advantage when we have flexibility in our ordinances. I think when it comes to housing costs, any kind of requirements we put in ordinances, which I'm not saying I'm against that sort of thing, but like costs get passed along. And if we want to talk about affordable housing and highest and best use of land, the more flexibility we put in the ordinances, the more it's going to help. And it might just be in a small way, but I think it's worth doing. But if there's any other, sorry, Commissioner Tuckerlund?
So if we don't change the ordinance and say there's a neighborhood that comes in and it would work best for the houses to have, a 15-foot rear instead of 20-foot, can we make an exception for them? Is that something we're allowed to do?
So it'd probably be a plan development, PUD. That'd be the best way of doing it. Because you wouldn't want to do it on a case-by-case basis, but if you did it as an overall development, that was the overall plan, it's the best way.
I guess as a follow-up for that question, do developers like to do PUDs in your opinion, Adam?
No, developers hate them. Well, developers don't like them because it takes longer. I mean, it's a longer process, and no, they don't like doing PUDs. Because they have to come in and ask for something that's not allowed, so the burden in some cases is on them to prove that that's why they need that exemption. So no, and they don't like doing it because it takes the certainty factor out of it. Developers want to know how long it's going to take to get through a process, and they want certainty at the end of the day they can build what they want to build. Because if they don't, then it costs time and it costs money. So they want. Okay, let's move on, I guess, if that's okay. Side yard setbacks, right now within the city, we have setbacks that range from 6 to 20 feet. The 6 feet is the minimum of the CR district, and then sometimes just by people going above and beyond what's what's required, which is typically in the NR district a 10-foot setback, you sometimes get these larger setbacks. And the one thing to Mr. Manley's point also about the fire codes, that's one thing that obviously if you start making changes to the side yard setback, you run into the issue with the fires as well too. This is actually Catherine's house, so this is just an example of looking at kind of the distance of when we talk about 20 feet. This is 18.4 feet between these two houses. This is approximately 7 feet from the cone over to that house, and this is close to what typically you find in that NR district in the city right now. Obviously it looks like she's also got some flower beds there and the air conditioner and this one as well, but I think from a side yard setback standpoint, I don't know how much you could change in that. I think if you're already at 6 and 8 in your CR and you're at 10 in the NR, there's really not much you would want to change in there. I mean, they're probably pretty close to where they need to be, but and we haven't talked to the fire department about this yet. We wanted to at least get the kind of feedback from the plan commission, but we have over the years we haven't heard too much in comments regarding that setback, just because that's not really a driving factor in most situations. I think going to the one that we have heard feedback in the past on, this is the front yard setback. This is the one that we typically have heard from developers on, to looking at exemptions to reduce that front yard setback and wanting the city to be kind of more creative with this as well too. So in the city right now, it is a 25 foot yard setback. Other areas, other municipalities, it ranges from 20 to 25 feet. So also some municipalities allow encroachments into the setback for front porches. The one comment I'll make on I'll make a few comments, but one of the comments I'll make is, if you're looking at changing the front yard setback, you need to make sure the garage stays at 25 feet. And the reason for that is if you put the garage at 20, typically a parking stall is about 18 feet, and it gets very close to hanging over the sidewalk. So the garage needs to stay at 25 feet regardless, otherwise you'll get cars that actually hang over onto the sidewalk, and it creates a public safety issue. I think just looking at some examples of if you were to look at some changes here, this is the Kentlands in Maryland, and we have some local examples as well. But there is a 10-foot setback for the actual structure itself, and then the porches are allowed to encroach into that setback, so you do get more of a street-type presence. This is a T&D development, traditional neighborhood design. So you have the garages that are rear-loaded in this situation, so it's slightly different than what we typically find in Verona. This is in Madison, where we have a 25-foot setback for the actual house itself. Porches are encroaching into it, and the setback from the sidewalk to the porch is approximately 20 feet. So once again, this is looking at trying to create a gathering space at the house with that porch feature and trying to move it a little closer to the road. Once again, Madison, again, you have approximately 20-foot setback to the house itself, and the porch is encroaching into that. The porch is approximately 15 feet, so a little bit closer as well. You start to lose that front yard, which is going to naturally happen just because obviously the building is closer to the road. And this, once again, is another example of a 25-foot setback, and the porch is at 20 feet as well. So just visually looking at this is, the visual look to it as well. If you wanted to allow potential, reductions in setbacks in the front, one thing to consider is trying to activate that street frontage, and that's what that porch does. You don't want a solid wall of building typically there, but if you have the porch there, it does provide that activity space for the home and kind of creates a unique and inviting space as well. And just one more example as well here. This is from South Carolina, but this is a 10-foot setback. It encourages porches, and then typically you have porches, stoops, awnings. I think in this case too, you have the one house here, and this is it's the garage is in the rear. Same with this house as well. But you have this one close to the road. You have this one back from the road as well. I know when Catherine and I have talked about this as well too, and one of the comments I've been making is, well, what about existing houses and how do you accommodate that? You don't want to take the setback down so low that you start getting this staggering effect. Now in this case, when you have the porch type feature, it does slightly mitigate that staggering effect as well too. It doesn't, you aren't looking at just a straight wall of house. You have the porch kind of softening that look to it as well too. So I think if we're going to consider reducing the setbacks, then the key is going to be that porch or that entryway element to kind of make it more inviting and try to make it more appealing as well to the pedestrian and also to the street. But it would potentially work in this kind of this example of you've got the one that's 10, and then you've got the other one that's probably about 20, 25. So once again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on front yard setbacks. This is the one that we do get comments from developers on, of looking at different ideas, looking at potentially, I think in the North neighborhood, this has been a conversation there. We've had this over the years with the Hometown Grove subdivision. One of the comments I've gotten from that developer who's doing the Hometown Grove subdivision right now is, hey, can you reduce the setbacks because it's for the CR district? Is that something you would consider? His advice to me has been doing the porch feature as well. He goes, you need to have the porch feature on that to kind of soften up the look of the house as well. But love to hear your feedback on this too.
Alder Gaskell.
So the North neighborhood plan is immediately what came to mind because it is a planned sort of, I wouldn't say traditional neighborhood design, it's more new traditional neighborhood, but are you getting requests from him and that design that the setbacks be smaller?
Well, that whole development would be a PUD. We haven't fully fleshed that out yet of exactly what exemptions are necessary, but I believe there would be some setback exemptions in there, especially on the front, because of the curving streets and how that would work. But we haven't fully fleshed that out yet of how that's going to work, just because they haven't gotten to that level yet.
I like the flexibility of that. I think that, it creates a little bit more of a tighter neighborhood feel, and people do walk in Verona, and, having a porch closer to you and potentially people on it encourages it a little bit more community. One thing I am a little worried about is if it's, the stagger effect, if that starts doing this, and if there's no sort of comprehensive for the entire neighborhood, the setbacks are going to be within this small range versus 10 to 25 feet, then that's more of an issue. But if we're doing a PUD, that doesn't really matter, right?
Well, it would matter. You want to look at that as part of the PUD.
Right, but I mean that we would have the control to do that versus just...
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that as it relates to the idea of staggering, I think that can be a problem when you get into street orientations and lot orientations where they're not perfectly linear. So if you can imagine where a street changes because there's a cul-de-sac, and you have somebody who has and the lots are angled, and you have somebody who's gone back sort of, maybe 25, 30 feet, and you have somebody who comes up 10 or 15 feet, you almost get the impression that your next door neighbor built their home in your front yard. I mean, you can imagine situations where you're looking out your front window and you see the front corner of your neighbor's house. And so I guess the only concern I would have is making sure that there's enough uniformity in the way that this would operate that we avoid those situations.
Thank you. Commissioner Heinzen?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with the comments from both of you that you made here just moments ago. Makes a lot of sense in the context of a brand new neighborhood coming in, I think, as opposed to sort of retroactively or retrofitting the entire city so that the lot here and there that still is unbuilt suddenly can be built upon and have a structure go up that just is sort of inconsistent with what everything, with the neighborhood for any number of reasons. And I think that all the examples that you showed, my guess is that they were neighborhoods that were built out with that, that setback in place. And so, and if the only way those neighborhoods come in are through a PUD, then maybe we don't have to worry about it. But so I guess this is my long way of saying, like it for new, don't think it's great for existing neighborhoods.
I think one option, as we've talked about it too, is, and it's not our preferred option, but it's something we could look at. You could just create a new district. That kind of gets to your point of, if you create a new district, going forward, you could have it for those people that want to zone their property that way. Administratively, we're just not crazy about it because you start getting a lot of districts that just, it's not as clean as we like it, but that was one of the options we talked about internally of just, you know, creating a new district that would be called whatever and establishing criteria for that district. And when developers came in, you still have your options of what you want to develop the property as. And then you can kind of get to the point of, okay, are you trying to mix these together, or is it just straight whatever this new district is, or is it NRCR? I mean, it's kind of to your point as well. So that's one option of kind of working through that as well too, for your concern. But that, yes, we recognize that could be a concern.
Okay, yeah.
Commissioner Manley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just forgot to mention, and I wanted to, that I like the concept of if we do have a 25-foot setback, for example, if that's what the number is, that a front porch doesn't count toward that. That the bulk of the, the major bulk of the building itself, the foundation is 25 foot back, for example, but the front porch would not. I think that's very reasonable.
I'll just make a comment myself. Yeah, I think that the opportunity for more porches and to create a community neighborhood little spaces throughout a neighborhood is a really good thing and has a lot of potential. Commissioner Tucker-Long?
I was just going to add that my personal preference would be to, you know, I like having houses closer to the street and having the larger activity space, I guess, in the back. Just because there's less traffic driving by in the back, so it's safer for younger kids, you know, kicking balls and stuff and not running into the street. But as far as, you know, the front, I do like the idea of porches being able to encroach over the boundary line. I think I don't like having the full building maybe be too close to the street, but the porches is sort of a nice transition between the house and the street.
Additional comments?
So kind of moving on, kind of the next section here. So I think as we've looked at the code here, we wanted to have the conversation with the Plan Commission as well. We know we need to make some modifications to our signage regulations. That's based upon a Supreme Court ruling. The whole signage section needs to be redone because of that ruling. Telecommunication towers, cell towers, because of changes in state law, we have to make changes to that as well. The whole thing needs to be redone. And then we need additional floodplain updates as well. We've also talked over the years about parking maximums. We've talked about potential chickens in the city. That's being talked about again. Fencing requirements as well as being discussed. Landscaping requirements, drive-through standards, setbacks, which you're talking about tonight. Density, and then the housing study from CARPC, which will hopefully be coming soon. Potentially incorporating anything from that as well into that item. So we've got a lot of potential updates coming for the zoning code, and then on top of that, we have a comprehensive plan that needs to be updated as well. The comprehensive plan should be updated in 10 years. We're coming up to that. We should start working on that in 2019. Staff is looking for feedback from the Plan Commission on where do you want to put our priorities, because ultimately we can't do all this at once just because of average workload and everything else we do. But one of the thoughts that we had regarding the comprehensive plan was actually Catherine's idea, and I thought it was a great idea. Potentially looking at trying to reaffirm that for a few years and not doing anything with it. And trying to get that updated once the 2020 census comes out. Right now we're not on that cycle, so we're working off ACS data, which is American Community Survey data, which the margin of error is larger. Potentially looking at just delaying that and working on the zoning code instead for next year. Probably the whole thing. But delaying the comprehensive plan until that the census data comes out, and then updating it with the latest data. It may be a better approach so we can get better data, and then we would get on the right schedule for the next 10 years going forward. That was one of our thoughts. Obviously the zoning code, if we do start working on that, our recommendation is actually just to redo the whole thing. I think we have enough changes here, enough conversation that we had. As we kind of looked at it, if the sign ordinance is going, we've got to redo that section. If we're looking at redoing, looking at parking standards, all the use section has to be redone. Right there we've thrown out 2 chapters of the sections of the code, and it's got 9 or 10 sections. Procedures needs to be reformatted as well. I mean, the whole thing needs to be redone. It was the same ordinance, and I have a bias against it, but it was the same ordinance that we had in Oconomowoc, and that was the comment. it was one of the best days when we got rid of that ordinance because it's very tough for people to get through. The average person, if they opened up the zoning ordinance, you know, Jeff and I were talking the other day, and it was we had to read it 2 or 3 times to interpret what was in there. I mean, it shouldn't be that tough. I mean, so I mean, if we redo it, we should just redo the whole thing and do it right and try to make this as user friendly as possible. And that could be with drawings or diagrams, but just trying to make it so an average person could pick it up and try to understand it, that we don't need an attorney or they don't need to come talk to me. But we're looking for direction though, as of where our priorities should be, because we don't want to start one of these and then find out, you know, which way should we go.
Commissioner, or Alder Gaskell.
So I fully support both of those. Delay the update to the comprehensive plan and get it on the census schedule makes much more sense to me. I mean, we're looking at 2 years. And then I think the ordinances are kind of a mess, and the better we can make them, as you said, that normal average people can read them with diagrams, we're saving staff time on that too. And we're saving, you know, there's a lot of savings. Right now it's very confusing, and I think, for instance, chickens are coming, so that is gonna happen. So I fully support both of those, and I think if you can focus on zoning and make it a modern day document, it would be fantastic.
Commissioner Heinzen.
Sure. Adam, does the League of Municipalities have I guess a uniform ordinances for the state?
No, they do
Oh,
not.
they don't. Okay.
They don't, no. So we have what's called the Slavny Code.
Yeah.
Like Slavny Vanderwall actually wrote it. If you look at Stoughton's code, it's virtually the same thing, and you can pull up 20 different ordinances throughout the state that look very similar.
Okay.
So no, but there's not a model ordinance out there by
Okay.
any means.
Commissioner Tuckalong.
I just echo that. I also think it'd be really good to get on the census data schedule. I mean, that seems to make just a ton of sense. It's better to have the best amount of data we can, as opposed to, you know, making big sweeping decisions 2 years before we get the best data we could use. So I'd rather get on that schedule as well. And I am also all for making the zoning stuff much more user-friendly and easy to read, because I've experienced it with people I know trying to figure out, you know, they want to comply with the zoning rules, but no one really understands what they mean. So, you know, I think we'll have better compliance too from people if they can understand what they're supposed to do. So.
I'll comment myself. Yeah, I'm fine with delaying it to get the best data census wise, and it makes sense to be on that schedule. I think, yeah, there's like a lot of zoning stuff, and just the idea of having it readable would be amazing. As someone who's looked through the ordinances myself and been confused, it would be nice if they were straightforward. I think I don't know, it's an opportunity to be a leader on this issue, and you know, I mean, how democratic can we be when people don't understand what the law is? And I like our city attorney, but you know, he charges a lot of money to talk to him. So the less we talk to him, the better off we are. And just in regards to the comment about chickens, I think that issue's been kicking around for like a long time, and I want to see it get an up or down vote, just to be fair to people. Other questions, comments?
Next item on the agenda was just the updates from the planning department. At your station, we had a sheet that just kind of briefly updates the plan commission on kind of what's going on in the city. I think I can just point out a few of these. The Lincoln Street Apartments, that's been to the plan commission a few times. That will actually go to the common council on July 23rd for a reconsideration request from 3 alders to look at the 90 apartment units. So that will be on that agenda. Legacy at Knoll Manor is under construction. That's for the 32 unit memory care facility. What else can I update you on? Kettle Creek North is working on starting their phase 2 of their project. That's going to be in the kind of the western part of that plat. And then Bach Racecraft actually got their approvals today. And yeah, I guess I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Sugar Creek Commons changes going to August PC. Do you have any idea what we're looking at yet?
Sure, there'll be obviously changes. Most likely, and I haven't seen the revisions yet. Most likely, will be additional units in the project. and then also possibly an additional story to to the buildings, so increase in height.
Additional housing units?
Correct.
Okay.
But that is tentatively planned for the August meeting.
Commissioner Heinzen.
Just curious, what, if anything, happening with Northwest?
I have no updates on that, so
Okay.
nothing.
Nothing.
Any other questions? Seeing none, was that all the updates? All right, next we're on to item 9, reports and comments from the plan commissioners. Does anyone have any reports or comments? All right, seeing none, we're on to item 10, adjournment. Motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Heinzen, is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Tucker Long. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned. Thank you.